name's Louise Wilson, and it's my absolute pleasure to be the host for today's Dynamic Board session. I currently sit on 3 boards. I sit on 1 charity and 2 other boards, and they're from various industries, and I chair 2 governance and people committees. My previous exec experience was in the sort of HR and consumer space, and so I now do board work and I do advisory and mentoring. I think today's topic is pretty popular. It's managing tensions and conflict in the boardroom, and we have a fantastic speaker who I thoroughly enjoyed meeting as part of the prep session, Kieran Moynihan, joining us today. So he is the managing partner of Board Excellence, which is an international board consulting firm, and they specialise in board evaluations, which I know is often a very popular topic on our WhatsApp group. They specialise in training and board dispute and mediation, and operate in the UK and in Ireland and in over 35 countries. And Kieran sent me some fantastic articles over the weekend, so I can absolutely say he's an internationally recognised thought leader in the area of the dynamics of a board effectiveness, performance and corporate governance. And he's got 24 years experience serving on boards, so he knows what it's like for all of us. So Kieran, over to you for 10 minutes of wisdom, if that's okay.
Thanks very much, Louise, and good afternoon to everyone. It's a great honour to share with you today, I suppose, our experiences of seeing boards and executive teams up close in action and how they work together. And delighted to see Dynamic Boards go from strength to strength. And for Sarah and the team, I think it's a fantastic resource, and it's something that we've been delighted to support and encourage over the years. So I suppose in terms of tensions and conflicts in the boardroom, when you think about board dynamics, and you know this in your own board meetings and committee meetings, that how tensions are managed and conflicts when they happen in the boardroom really goes to the very heart of how boards and executive teams work together. And the thing is that in our experience, when we see the best boards and executive teams in action, and it doesn't matter, we do a lot of FTSE and stock market listed board evaluations, but we do a lot of non-profit, charity, public sector. But every time we see really good boards and executive teams in action, they really embrace healthy tensions, right? And they're actually a fundamental part of boards and executive teams working really well together. Because if you think about it, at the heart of a highly effective, high-performing board, you're going to have a fantastic level of high-quality challenge and debate. And with that necessarily is going to come tensions, because you're going to have a lot of different views. The CEO is going to have one perspective, board chair may differ, the non-execs may really be on a different page from the non-exec directors or from the executive team. So all that comes together is that it's very natural you're going to have a lot of those type of healthy tensions. The fact that a good set of non-exec directors are going to hold the CEO and executive team's feet to the fire and their performance, their decision-making, their behaviors, by definition, there's going to bring a lot of healthy tension to the boardroom dynamics. And the other thing is, we find ultimately the board has many sets of responsibility, as you know, but when you strip it right down to the core of the function of the board is to make the very best decisions for the organization. And with that, the board and the executive team, they need to stretch each other, right? They really need to push each other, because a lot of times there's not an obvious path forward. So you're going to get a lot of tensions. And the final thing is, when an organization is under pressure, if there's major decisions to be made, if there's serious crises that happen, by definition, you're going to get a lot of tensions. Conflict represents a stage where those healthy tensions have not only become negative, but they're starting to get to the point of really damaging the functioning of the board, right? Really crippling the board. And it could be a complete breakdown in the trust between the board and the CEO and the executive team, between various board directors themselves, within the board, forgetting about the executive team for a moment. So with that, there's going to come a lot of then conflict in that type of situations. And I suppose the most obvious case where conflict is starting to set in the boardroom is where the trust starts to get fractured and damaged. The most common case is between the non-exec directors and the CEO and the executive team, but sometimes it's between the board chair and the CEO and between one or more of the non-exec directors. And sometimes you get camps on the board who have different views. And I suppose a very common scenario as well between the non-execs and the CEO and the executive team is where there's a them and us and there's serious conflict has emerged. And I suppose how you start to see conflict is people are starting to get very emotional in the board and committee meetings. You're starting to see people's body language really get difficult. You're starting to see some aggressive behaviors, some passive aggressive behaviors. In some cases, you know, we, as part of our board evaluation process, we observe board and committee meetings, and you see all types of behaviors, literally people resigning at the board table, slamming the door, the table, everything, right? And that's where it really manifests itself. And in terms of one of the critical responsibilities of the board chair, anytime we see serious negative tensions and conflict, the buck stops with the board chair in terms of the overall management of the tensions within the board. And it's a real responsibility on the board chair. And sometimes board chairs can struggle with that, where there's a serious dispute and serious conflict. And I suppose we give a lot of guidance to board chairs, and we often do special training for groups of board chairs together. And one of the things we really highlight to them is where a really smart chair recognizes the trigger point, where the kind of tensions are starting to get towards that border region where they can get out of control. That's where a really good board chair who's very thoughtful, good levels of emotional intelligence, they really know their board, their executive team, that's where they can nip it in the bud. And that phrase, a stitch in time saves nine, is truly very important within the boardroom itself. But obviously, sometimes with the best will in the world, and even with a good board chair, a conflict is going to break out and happen. And what we find, we often mediate board conflicts and disputes. And one of the most important things to fix a board conflict and dispute is to actually acknowledge that it's there. And that classic phrase about facing up to the elephant in the room is really important when you're trying to fix serious conflict in the boardroom. And the chair in particular, and we also look to the CEO as well, who leads obviously the executive team, for them collectively to be very honest with the board and the executive team to say, listen, Houston, we have a problem and it's complex. We'd have obviously preferred not to get there, but we're here now. So some techniques then to obviously try and mitigate and address that when it happens is, first of all, everyone sometimes increasing the amount of listening rather than speaking, and sometimes giving too strong a view on different things. And just the body language and the questions of, rather than giving very strongly worded views and statements, it's just even simple questions like, could you please help me understand your perspective? And simple things like saying, I believe rather than we. Sometimes when we're all a bit exercised, we can use the phrase we rather than I to say, listen, we don't really agree with that perspective. We're not happy with the executive team's performance. And sometimes other non-exec directors are looking around saying, I'm quite happy. So it's important just to be careful of that. The other thing then to highlight as well is tensions and conflicts are a lot more difficult to manage virtually than when you're in the room, right? And sometimes what we see is boards, one of the reasons boards are starting to move back to in-person meetings is they're struggling really managing the tensions virtually on Teams and Zoom calls, because sometimes people will turn off their camera, they will just kind of be very icily polite, and they won't really engage in a way when you're in the board meeting and you're physically there. And a lot of chairs would say to us, they really struggle in managing those tensions and that. And I suppose just to wrap up in terms of just to highlight that healthy tensions and people being on their toes, the non-execs, the executive team, and in particular that critical responsibility each of you have to holding the CEO and the executive team's feet to the fire and their performance and their commitments, and the high quality challenge and debate to make the best decisions. Healthy tensions are critical in enabling that in our experience. But obviously, once tensions start to escalate to the point of view where they're really becoming negative, people are starting to get personalized, that's a stage then where in particular the chair and the wiser non-execs on the board need to have that cool head to step in. And that's it, Louise.
Thank you, Kieran. Perfectly timed. Thank you very much.